Let's ask our panel. Fox News contributor Kat Timpf, the National Review online reporter Maddie Duppler, Independent Women's Forum visiting fellow. Also, we have Daniel Griswold, Mercatus Institute senior research fellow. Maddie, I got to start with you. You've been a champion of a lot of President Trump's actions on trade negotiations. Yep. Some people were a little had their feathers ruffled because this Trump tweet earlier talked about bringing jobs back to China. That wasn't the America First agenda.
Right. And I will also say that the other presidential tweet, be cool, is probably the best advice that we can take right now when trying to decipher what President Trump is doing with these negotiations. Now, looking at China, there's a lot that China needs to do in order for us to be very concerned about bringing jobs back to China. China is a country of 1.4 billion people, has zero protections for personal property, has absolutely no incentive for private enterprise. There's a lot of issues with China where if Chinese jobs are at the top of the radar for the American president, I think that there's a lot more that our president can be doing to talk about the economy here at home. And on the heels of our tax reform bill, the deregulation agenda that the Trump administration has passed, I think it's a mistake for the president to look anywhere else besides the United States when talking about investment and talking about ways that we can improve this economy. So moving forward, I think it's important that the administration continues to identify what goals they're trying to accomplish when negotiating with China, and then any actions they put forward to be targeted and predicated on those goals, rather than trying to do something far and wide that doesn't have very discrete consequences.
Right. And by the same token, Daniel, we do have this hard deadline with China coming up very shortly, where we start to get these tariffs start to layer on pretty thick, and maybe get to a point where they go down a slippery slope. There were some U.S. stocks though that did benefit from this. ACAI was up big, Finisar was up big, Qualcomm had a nice bump, NXPI. So there are some American companies that benefit from ZTE doing business in this country. However, this was seen as coming out of left field.
Charles, I think the president is to be commended for de-escalating our confrontation with China. As you point out, this isn't just about jobs in China. It's about jobs here in the United States. ZTE sources more than 40% of its components here in the United States. At least up until recently, they were spending $2.6 billion on components here in the United States, including semiconductors, the glass that goes on their smartphones. You mentioned Qualcomm. There's also Micron and Corning and others. And so this is good for jobs here in the United States. And we also have to remember, when our government cuts off supplies to foreign providers, that hurts us as well as them. It tarnishes our reputation as a reliable supplier. China, it isn't just an us versus them. We have integrated supply chains with China. They're the number 3 market for U.S. exported goods and services. Right. We have a mutually beneficial relationship with China. The president's taken a proper move. I think the Democratic criticism of him is unwarranted.
Well, it's not just Democratic criticism, though, to be fair, right, Kat? A lot of economic, conservative, intellectual, the orthodoxy of conservatism, even libertarians are saying you don't start trade wars. Now, I've always argued since tariffs are already in place, there's already been a war per se, but we are certainly ratcheting it up to the next level. This is a high-stakes game of chicken, isn't it?
Right, absolutely, which is why I think that this latest move is something that I like to see. I don't think it shows weakness. I think it's typical of President Trump in negotiating to give a little, get a little. This is what he does, and there could be a lot of reasons for this, in addition to just the fact that it's going to help American jobs, the American economy, too. Also, we have that big summit with North Korea coming up. The president of China is going to be very, very important when dealing with that, and he might want to have better relations with the president of China going into that summit, because he's really looking for a foreign policy win there, just not for himself, but for the country and also for the world.
How do you think it'll break down, then? How much, because we know that Kim Jong-un has visited China twice just in the last couple of months, and we understand the role that they're playing. How much, then, of leeway do you think that gives President Trump with respect to this grand scheme of reducing trade, the trade deficit by 100 to 200 billion?
Yeah, not as much leeway as he would have had if things were a little different, because China is very, very important when it comes to North Korea. They're the ones that have a lot of influence, and we need to have good relations with China in order to have more influence with North Korea.
So Maddie, I mean, taking that into the equation, also, of course, the idea we do want China to open their markets. I mean, again, I'm looking for the news to come out that, hey, China just opened their markets to more American industries. That's the big news that I think I'm waiting for next.
I think that would be great news. What I want to see is the administration approach trade the way they approach tax reform, which is creating a system where we have a globally competitive marketplace. So I worry a little bit when I see the president tweet about just specific industries or specific companies. What we need is consistent trade policy that levels the playing field so that all companies in all countries can compete. Because we know the United States is going to win that competition. It's just a matter of having rules that businesses can anticipate and making sure that all of those rules are in place and don't continue to change just based on the whim of the tweet or on the whim of the day.
Well, Maddie, let me ask you then, is this the most important thing for our economy this year? Avoiding a deeper escalation of these tensions, finding a way to resolve this, because if it goes deeper, if it goes far as possible, would it erase the tax gains? Would it erase all the things we've seen from deregulations? This is it.
Absolutely.
This is the number one topic.
Absolutely agree with you. Everything that Dan said about why it's important to de-escalate is absolutely true. We need to focus on what's happening here at home, which is that we have an economy that is finally surging forward after years of latency. We need to make sure that we keep the pedal to the metal on that growth, and that means not having any trade policy that would undermine the economy and what we're doing domestically, which is we're seeing all these gains that we haven't seen in years.
So by that token, though, Dan, it's important also that we win this. This is sort of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to sort of change the arc of the unfair trade relationship we have with China, isn't it?
Well, Charles, we have a mutually beneficial trade relationship with China now. I'd like their market to be more open, but we can't go around dictating to the countries of the world what their trade policy is. The most important thing is that we have the right trade policy here in the United States, and that's free trade, keeping our market open to global competition that benefits our consumers. Our producers can tap into global supply chains. When we slap tariffs on steel and other things, we make it harder to produce products here in the United States because we are pricing ourselves out of competitiveness in global markets. I agree with what you and the other guests have said. Our economy is doing quite well. The biggest cloud of uncertainty is this administration's trade policy and a potential trade war, and that's why I think the president's move today is so welcome. He's turned down the temperature. Let's get back to business of constructive negotiations with China and other countries to lower trade barriers around the world.
Yeah, I have a feeling that tweet was probably chapter 3 or something in Art of the Deal, although that was pre-tweet.